The 1st and 2nd American platoons move forward in column 300 meters apart. They see nothing as they enter the battlefield. The VC sniper team and the 2 forward NVA platoons spot the Americans coming forward. Now spotted, the Eastern platoon sends its runner off to pass the message on to the mortar team saying the Americans have arrived, so they can begin firing. The VC snipers open fire, but all shots miss. However, in firing, they alert the Americans to their positions. The 1st platoon fails to spot the NVA platoon to their left. The 2nd lieutenant in command deploys his troops to the right to meet the sniper threat. The 1st squad fires but misses the snipers. Meanwhile, the 2nd platoon does spot the NVA platoon in front of them. The 2nd lieutenant deploys his troops to the right as one of his squads engages the sniper and hits them. The runner from the Eastern platoon continues to make his way towards the mortar team, who can hear the gunfire and know they are required soon. The snipers continue to engage the American troops they can see, but both miss. The NVA V platoon on the western side opens fire on the leading elements, hitting 4 and causing one of the units to withdraw. At this stage, there is 1 VC casualty and 4 American casualties. The 1st platoon is now alert to the danger on their left flank and moves troops round to meet it. Prone units return fire and succeed in removing the sniper threat and pinning down numbers of the North Vietnamese troops. Meanwhile, the forward observer targets the centre of the V with the India battery, who will commence firing in 3 minutes' time. The mortar team also target the same area. Their fire will begin next turn. On the right flank, the 2nd platoon move to engage their threat and successfully pin down an NVA unit. The NVA V platoon returns fire on the 1st American platoon, causing some casualties. The sniper in the jungle shoots at the 2nd platoon but misses. The VC sections return fire on the 2nd American platoon, again causing some casualties. Next move, the NVA mortar will begin targeting cell 1413, just in front of the 2nd American platoon. The 1st platoon continues to return fire, and the mortar rounds begin to strike the North Vietnamese position. The 2nd platoon's heavy machine gun section removes the sniper in the jungle, whilst the remainder of the troops continue to press home their attack on the right flank. The North Vietnamese platoon to the west begins to withdraw under mortar fire, apart from a few sections which are pinned down. The NVA platoon to the east returns fire on the Americans as the mortar rounds begin to rain down close to the American position. The first shells of India battery begin to fall down on the fleeing NVA platoon. With their backs turned, they make easy targets for the American platoon, who gun them down. Meanwhile, the left flank of the NVA platoon is pinned down under fire by the remaining American 1st platoon. The 2nd platoon begins to move its heavy machine gun section towards the jungle, followed by another fire team that cannot see due to the mortar rounds continuing to fall in front of them. The remainder of 2nd platoon continue to pour fire on the NVA in front of them. The platoon HQ and the runner make their way back through the 2nd line of troops waiting in surprise for the Americans. One of the squads rallies and begins to pull back, not wishing to face any further artillery fire. The remainder are still pinned under fire. To the right, the NVA platoon open fire on the American machine gun squad moving in front of them, but they miss. Mortar fire continues to fall in front of the American position. At the start of this move, the VC have 26 casualties and the Americans have 12 casualties. The forward observer ceases the artillery fire on the VC section that has now retired and begins to target the VC section on the eastern flank. Likewise, the mortar team begin to switch target. The 1st platoon continued to fire down onto the remaining pinned sections of the NVA, whilst the 2nd platoon begins to move and fire steadily towards the jungle area before it. On the western flank, the pinned VC sections finally decide to move and begin running with their backs turned, hoping they avoid the fate that fell to their colleagues. The headquarters for this platoon have worked their way round into the jungle area behind the waiting NVA section formed in a defensive V before the minefield. They hope that the Americans will follow on and not spot them and begin a second process of attrition. On the eastern flank, the NVA section continue to return fire on the Americans as they continue to move towards the jungle area. 3rd platoon with Company HQ is going to be flying in next move by Huey, so both platoons mark their positions by smoke markers. 1st platoon continue to fire on the withdrawing NVA section, but fail to hit them. One of the sections notices an NVA section lying in the grass some 350 meters away. The NVA platoon in front of them is beginning to be discovered. On the eastern flank, 2nd platoon make their way into the jungle area, whilst one section gives covering fire. Combination of this fire and artillery and mortar rounds extracts a heavy toll on the NVA platoon fighting there. All artillery and mortar fire ceases from this moment on, whilst the Hueys fly in next move. The NVA section on the western side of the battlefield withdraws successfully to the open ground before the village. Their officer emerges from the jungle line to guide them towards him. He will take what remains of his command round the jungle to begin a flanking maneuver should the Americans attack. On the eastern side, the NVA platoon begins to withdraw after heavy artillery and mortar fire and constant suppressive fire from the platoon they face. They begin heading back towards the VC platoon in front of them. The NVA mortar continues to pound the ground down close to where 2nd platoon was some time ago. No runner has yet told them to stop firing, so they will continue to do so until ordered not to. The NVA have noticed smoke rising up from the American positions, which tells them they will shortly be under some form of air assault. Meanwhile, deep in the jungle line to the north of the village, the reserve company is finally beginning to appear, having made their way rapidly to the battlefield due to the sound of gunfire. 3rd platoon with Company HQ fly in by a Huey and hover 100 meters off the ground at the positions indicated. They spot the NVA platoon in front of 1st platoon, together with the waiting VC platoon over on the far east corner, and up against the jungle line, the NVA mortar section that's been causing so much trouble. 1st platoon moves forward to accommodate the Hueys coming in, but in so doing moves itself towards the waiting NVA section, which has only been partially spotted by the platoon. 2nd platoon is now consolidating in the jungle line to the south of the paddy field. The firing section from 2nd platoon hits another NVA section. The NVA machine gunners in the village spot the Hueys coming in, opening fire at long distance but missing. They thus reveal their own position to the helicopters. Meanwhile, the NVA platoon on the western side opens fire on the Americans heading towards them, pinning down 2 sections and causing some casualties. On the eastern flank, the remainder of the NVA platoon make their way back through the VC platoon. The reserve NVA company is making its way steadily through the jungle and is just about to emerge when the sound of the Huey helicopters persuade it to remain hidden in the jungle and out of sight. 3rd platoon make their way from the helicopters that have just landed. Meanwhile, the helicopter carrying Company HQ is hovering over the landing zone. 1st platoon continue to fire at the NVA section before them, scoring some hits. 2nd platoon are now firmly lodged in the jungle area to the south of the paddy field. To the west, the NVA section before the minefield continued to attack the US platoon before them, again scoring some hits. They spot some of the troops coming out of the helicopters, which puts them on alert for an attack that will shortly happen. The first platoon that was forced to withdraw makes its way round the jungle line, ready to start an attack out of the jungle. On the eastern side, the NVA section withdraws through the waiting VC section. This triggers a runner to tell the mortar to start firing before the VC section. It will take time for the mortar to switch targets. The machine gun sections in the village open fire on the company HQ helicopter hovering, but miss. Meanwhile, the reserve company continues its advance through the jungle. First platoon continue to attack the NVA section before them, scoring some heads. Meanwhile, the third platoon with the company HQ makes their way up behind first platoon. The forward observing officer makes his way towards the company HQ. The majority of the Hueys that dropped third platoon rise into the air and begin attacking at long range with machine guns the NVA platoon in front of first platoon. Meanwhile, second platoon consolidate their position around the jungle line to the south of the village. Sections of the NVA platoon under heavy fire begin to withdraw, and yet they score their own successes, especially on the third American platoon. The remnants of the first platoon have worked their way through the jungle line and are about to begin their flanking maneuver. The VC platoon to the east of the village starts firing on second platoon by the jungle line, but miss. The machine gunners in the village fire at the Hueys as they rise into the air, but miss. Meanwhile, to the north of the village, the NVA Reserve Company makes its way steadily onto the battlefield. The expected F-4 Phantom jet strike comes in, and it streaks across the battlefield, targeting the NVA mortar section that's been troubling the eastern flank of the battlefield. A cluster of M82 bombs falls and eliminates the mortar section, also hitting two other VC sections that the Americans on the ground can't see. On the western flank, first platoon continues the firefight with the NVA platoon in front of it. It is slowly winning, forcing sections of the NVA platoon to withdraw under fire. Second platoon by the jungle line add their own support, but with little effect. The third platoon, which just landed, begins a flanking maneuver behind first platoon and advances forward. The first section stumbles into a minefield, which goes off, producing one casualty and pinning the rest of the squad down. The Huey helicopter, which dropped off the company commander, remains on the ground, while the Phantom flies over the battlefield. The forward observer makes his way towards the company commander. The F-4 Phantom jet strikes takes the NVA by surprise and causes multiple casualties, pinning some troops down in shock. This impedes the advance of the reserve 3rd Platoon now emerging through the jungle line onto the battlefield. The Central Reserve NVA Platoon emerges out of the jungle line and thanks its lucky stars that the Phantom F4 dropped its bombs elsewhere. On the western flank, another NVA Reserve Platoon makes its way through the jungle towards the ensuing gunfight. The NVA platoon that had stood so long fighting off the Americans is beginning to crack under fire as section after section withdraws in disorder. Each unit they encounter pins them in morale confusion. To help alleviate some of this pressure, a flanking attack begins by the remnants of the 1st Platoon to fight the Americans, and they emerge swiftly out of the jungle to try and form an L section with the pinned down sections, hoping to shoot the Americans away. In the village, the NVA machine gunners offer their own support, but miss. And to the far east, the VC platoon also add their rifle fire onto the Americans around the jungle line. We can see the tally of casualties for both sides as the battle unfolds. The USA are scoring considerably more casualties on the VC NVA than they are suffering in return, and yet the battle is finally poised. We leave the battle at this point to your imagination and maybe to play the game for yourself to see what happens.